Good afternoon. Welcome to the Senate Committee on Education. We're going to go ahead and begin. I know we've got people coming and going, so I want to start, and then we might make some changes as we go, or we might stop the hearing and go to some work sessions, but we'll go from there. So anyways, we welcome you today, and will Secretary please call the roll?
Vice Chair Dondera-Luke. Senator Hardy. Senator Hammond. Senator Lang. Senator Buck. Senator Dunyate. Chair Dennis.
Here, thank you. We do have a quorum. I know Senator Lang is here. She is just in another committee, so she'll join us shortly. And I know at least one has to leave. So if you have to leave for another thing, let me know, because I want to make sure we get everybody here to do the work session. But I'm going to first of all. Just for everybody in person online, keep yourselves muted when not speaking and silence your electronic devices. For all individuals meeting in our present room, please always keep your face coverings on and maintain social distancing. Committee information is available on Nellis, which is on our website. You can also watch via Nellis or the legislature's YouTube channel. And with those wishing to give public testimony or public comment must register to participate through Nellis. And if you're going to do it by phone, they'll email you a confirmation and give you what you need to be able to connect. You can also submit written comments as outlined in the agenda. When testifying, state and spell your name and affiliation, and if any. And it's important too to just identify yourselves if you're speaking as we go back and forth, so that it's really clear who says what. So you just need to tell us your name every time you answer a question or give a comment. And I'm going to take public comment at the end, and I will limit that to 2 minutes per person. You can also submit your full comments in writing and just summarize them when you speak. So that's it. Now let me go over the agenda real quick. We're just going to go in order on the two bills. Soon as I have quorum, I'm going to switch to work session. We'll go through some of these. And just so, depending on which agenda, if you're looking at the most recent agenda, AB 67 is going to be moved to Wednesday. I'm also going to move AB 109 to Wednesday. I know there's an amendment coming on 67, and there's some stuff still going on with 109. So those two will just move to Wednesday. And the rest we'll just do them in order. So with that, we're going to begin with AB 194. So I'm going to open the hearing on AB 194. Let's see. This measure, rights to education requiring annual reports of accountability to include certain information related to restorative justice and other things. And so that's what we're going to learn about now. We've got Assemblywoman Torres here with us. So whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Dennis and members of the Committee on Education. For the record,
Assemblywoman Torres, I'm going to stop you for just a second since I've got somebody here. Rather than stop you in the middle of your thing, I'm going to do this real quick. And so we're going to close the hearing on AB 194 just for a minute. Sorry about that. But since I've got everybody here, you know how that goes. Thanks. So if we could go to our work session.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm, Committee Policy Analyst. We have 5 bills on work session today, beginning with Assembly Bill 19, which was presented by Nevada's Department of Education on May 5th. The bill changes the subjects included within the social studies core academic subject by removing government and instead including civics, financial literacy, and multicultural education. The bill also exempts the adoption, amendment, or repeal of standards of content and performance for courses of study in public schools by the Council to Establish Academic Standards for Public Schools and the State Board of Education from the process generally required for adopting regulations. The bill requires that all regulations establishing standards of content and performance for courses of study in public schools be removed from the NAC. And attached to this work session document is the mock-up proposed by Senator Dennis, which deletes Section 1 regarding the changes to the social studies core academic subject for homeschool children. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So, questions? We heard this on the 5th of May. One of the things that I will point out, because we just had a discussion with some members earlier, the standards which currently are set through the Academic Standards Council and through also the State Board of Education, through regulation, would change, and that would be an internal thing that would be through the department that they would set those standards. So that's the one item, and then of course it talks about the civics, financial literacy, multicultural things that we have implemented, and this puts it in there. And then you have the amendment that I put forth. So do we have any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion. We have a motion by Assemblywoman Dondero Loop, second by Senator Oñate. Further discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Okay, motion carries. Let's see. Senator Oñate, would you do the floor statement on this one? Thank you. All right, let's go to the next one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm for the record. The next bill on work session today is Assembly Bill 38, which was presented by Nevada's Department of Education on April 26th. AB 38 revises the membership and duties of an advisory technical skills committee appointed by the superintendent of a school district that has established a program of career and technical education and exempts such a committee from Nevada's open meeting law. Additionally, rather than appointing an advisory committee, the bill allows the superintendent or his or her designee to consult with certain stakeholders to perform the advisory committee's duties. The bill also revises certain provisions governing work-based learning programs of school districts and charter schools, including application requirements, program content, reporting requirements, and student evaluations. And Mr. Chair, there are no amendments to this bill at this time.
Any questions? We have a motion to approve. Let me just make sure anybody have any questions. If not, I believe that was Senator Hardy to make a motion, second by Senator Oñate. Any further discussion on the bill? All right, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. And on that one, let's see, Senator Hammond, would you do that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm, Committee Policy Analyst. The next bill on work session is AB 68, which was presented by the State Public Charter School Authority on April 30th. The bill exempts a charter school that has been approved to be rated under the Alternative Performance Framework from both mandatory contract termination and the requirement that the authority, Board of Trustees of a school district, or college or university within the Nevada system of higher education, as applicable, deny a request to amend a charter contract if the charter school does not meet certain requirements of the performance framework. Second, AB 68 authorizes the sponsor of a charter school to implement certain elementary, middle, or high schools in or campuses of a charter school if the school does not meet certain performance criteria or under certain other circumstances. Finally, the bill increases the time period in which the authority must consider new charter school applications from 60 to 120 days. And at this time, there are no amendments proposed. Mr. Chair.
Questions? Okay, I'll entertain a motion. Senator Oñate? Senator Johnson makes a motion. Do we have a second? Second from Senator Dondero Loop. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. Senator Buck, would you do the floor statement? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm for the record. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 417, which was presented by Assemblywoman Tolles on May 3rd. The bill revises provisions related to school bus inspections by reducing the frequency of inspections from semi-annually to annually and requiring the reinspection of any vehicle that receives a violation notice. The bill also increases the number of days to correct a bus defect from 10 days to 20 calendar days. Finally, AB 417 requires the Department of Public Safety to submit an annual report to each superintendent of a school district on the health and safety of the district's fleet. And there are no amendments proposed at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Questions? You have Senator Doñate? Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair Dennis. Particularly with this bill, the only thing that I wanted to mention was that, I rode the bus from 6th grade all the way until 12th grade. I don't like the part where we're changing it from semi-annual to annual. But I understand it. I understand the workload that they have, but, begrudgingly, I disagree with it. So I will be voting yes for it, but I reserve my right to change my vote. So thank you.
Thank you. If I remember right, this was an issue that came up during the interim with interim education. And even though it's annually, I think that as far as the safety check is actually going to be, this is a better than just because it also includes the report that comes from public safety. So I think it's actually going to make it safer for our buses. So as you take a look, I have to look back, but that's what I remember from it. That's why I thought it was good to, I don't want to do things less, but if we can do it less and actually make it more efficient, where they can actually do them and actually get the repairs done, I think that would be a good thing. So thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I will entertain a motion. Senator Dondero Loop makes a motion. Second, I heard a second from somebody. Oh, Senator Hammond. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. Let's see, Senator Hardy, would you do that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm, Committee Policy Analyst. The final bill on work session today is Assembly Bill 419, which was presented by Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod on April 30th. AB 419 requires the sponsor of a charter school to establish standards for and provide training on the governance of the charter school. The bill also requires the governing body of a charter school to disclose and post on its website certain information regarding contracts made between the school and a charter management organization or educational management organization. Additionally, AB 419 requires the sponsor of a charter school that received a 1 or 2 star performance rating in each of the last 3 consecutive years to submit a report to the Legislative Committee on Education on actions taken to reconstitute the governing body or terminate the charter contract. The bill also requires a proposed sponsor of a new charter school in reviewing an application to form a charter school, and the sponsor of an existing charter school in reviewing a request to amend a charter contract to consider the academic, financial, and organizational performance of charter schools that currently hold a contract with the proposed operator. And there is one proposed amendment which is attached to this bill page. Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod proposed allowing organizations, in addition to the sponsor of a charter school, to provide approved training on the governance of charter schools. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Questions or discussion? Yeah. Senator Buck?
Thank you, Chair Dennis. Again, I'm going to go ahead and vote yes, but I want to reserve my right just because I feel like all of this legislation going after charter schools is unfounded when we don't look at districts the same way with their governance structures, with how much time they spend in their meetings on academics and student achievement and finances and building construction, and that needs to happen across the board for all schools, not just charter schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion or comments? Okay, I'll entertain a motion. And it would be, this one would be an amend and do pass. Hopefully we did that on the other one. Yep. Senator Doñate. Okay, we have a motion to amend and do pass. Second from Senator Don Darrell Loop. Further discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. Senator Lang, would you do the floor statement on that? Okay, just want to double check. Did we do on the other one that had an amendment? We did an amend and do pass, correct? I think that was the 19, right? Just because we're not positive, let's go back to AB 19. We did, let's see, that was Senator Don Darrell Loop, I believe, made the motion. But I want to make sure that we get it right on the record. It was an amend and do pass. So if we could have that motion.
Move to amend and do pass.
Okay, and I believe Senator Doñate gave the second on that one. Okay, any further discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Okay, motion carries. Just out of caution, I just want to make sure we got that right. Okay, and the rest were all do pass.
Chair Dennis,
Yes.
if you could excuse me, there was a little confusion at the committee hearing, and they want me to come back up.
Sure.
Thank
We're
you.
done here, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll come back where we started. And we will open the hearing on AB 194 again. So this time I'll try not to interrupt you so that you can make your presentation.
No worries. I have the afternoon blocked out.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Dennis and members of the Committee on Education. For the record, I am Assemblywoman Selena Torres, and I proudly represent Assembly District 3 in Las Vegas, Nevada. And this afternoon, I'll be presenting on AB 194, which revises provisions governing suspension and expulsion. Before I begin, I would like to provide a brief roadmap of today's presentation. First, I will provide some background information on this legislation, and then I'll pass the presentation to Jonathan Norman, who's available on Zoom today, and Team Chief of the Education Advocacy Program with legal aid from Southern Nevada, who will walk the committee through the bill. I want to thank all stakeholders who've reached out to collaborate on this bill. In the Assembly, we worked diligently on this piece of legislation to find common ground. These conversations started throughout the interim, and I'm excited to present this piece of legislation that has come from that dialogue with the school districts, the Nevada Department of Education, educators, and education advocates. I'll now go ahead and provide some background information on this piece of legislation. Brown v. Board of Education states that education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments, and it is with this mindset that we open the dialogue on AB 194. The genesis of this legislation was watching students and their families struggle to appeal the suspensions and expulsions of their students. In the summer of 2020, thanks to the help of the amazing staff here at LCB, it became clear that the appeals process for Nevada school districts varied an incredible amount. If a student violates their school's code of conduct, the appeals process from one school district to another is nearly unrecognizable. This seemed unjust. This body knows that students of color are disproportionately more likely to be suspended and expelled from schools. This is not unique to Nevada. Nonetheless, African American students are significantly more likely to be suspended or expelled. This legislation does not resolve this issue, but works to ensure that students that are suspended and expelled from school are afforded due process, and that schools are planning for how they will implement restorative justice and train their school staff and faculty. Nonetheless, schools have the responsibility to provide students with due process. Education is a right afforded to Nevadans. The U.S. Supreme Court case Goss v. Lopez indicates that the right to a free and public education cannot be withdrawn on grounds of misconduct, absent fundamentally fair procedures to determine whether misconduct has occurred. Nevada students do not shed their constitutional rights at the doors of our schools. Education is a property and liberty interest of Nevada families. School suspensions and expulsions have a lasting impact on students. It impacts their education, their likelihood of getting accepted in college, and may even impact them if they're in the criminal justice system. Both Goss v. Lopez and Brown v. Board of Education established that students have due process under the 14th Amendment, no matter how arbitrary the incident. This legislative body has a responsibility to ensure that this due process is clear in statute and in regulation. This legislation does not seek to outline what due process will look like in Nevada schools. Rather, the legislation requires that the Nevada Department of Education releases guidance on what this appeals process should look like and what the timeline should look like. I am expecting a small amendment to come to this committee, and that would just be in regards to the final section of this legislation, Section 13, which is the date that it becomes effective. We recognize that the Nevada Department of Education will need some time to create the regulations that this bill requires them to create before this bill can take effect, but that there are several other portions of the legislation that could take effect immediately. At this time, I will introduce Mr. Jonathan Norman, Team Chief of the Education Advocacy Program with Legal Aid from Southern Nevada, who will walk the committee through the bill.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Torres. Jonathan Norman, Jonathan, Norman, Norman, for the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. I'm the Team Chief of the Education Advocacy Program at the Legal Aid Center. Honorable members of this committee, thank you for taking the time today to consider this bill. Section 1 builds off the restorative justice practices that were implemented last session to ensure teachers have the tools they need to effectively implement restorative practices in the classroom. It requires school districts to provide information on their plan for restorative justice and progressive discipline and the training that schools are providing employees in these practices. Section 1.5 requires that the student achievement plans prepared by school principals and employees include academic and non-academic supports in accordance with NRS 388.885. Sections 2 and 3 require that when a child and family is exercising their right to appeal, that the child is still able to continue to receive an education in the least restrictive environment possible. Those options would be behavior school or potentially online schooling. Section 5 requires school districts to adopt a policy for appealing suspensions and expulsions for students. And that said process must be explained to parents so that they have the information they need to decide if appealing is appropriate in their case. It also clarifies that if a family chooses to appeal, the punishment may not be increased as a result. We have seen some cases where the threat that review may lead to a harsher punishment has scared families out of exercising their right to appeal, even when they believed there is merit to appealing. Section 5, subsection 2 and 3 requires that the appeal policy be posted on the school district's website so that families have access to this information, and clarifies that the appeal hearings are closed to the public. Section 5 also requires the Nevada Department of Education to establish a timeline by regulation for students' appeal process and oversee the regulatory process for this bill. Section 7 requires the Department of Education to provide guidance to school districts on the appeals process in as many languages as possible for the benefits of students and their parents and guardians. With that, I would welcome any questions. Thank you.
Is that the end of the presentation?
Yes, Chair, we are ready for questions.
Perfect. Okay, any questions? Senator Loop.
Thank you very much. So under section 1, subsection 1, page 4, lines 19 or 26 through 36 about, you've got listed all kinds of groups. So I just guess I'd like to know within those groups, how do you identify them? Like when you say economically disadvantaged, will that be free and reduced lunch? When you say major racial and ethnic groups, what will that include? Migratory children, does that mean transitional, like they've gone to California, they've come back, or does that mean they've come into the country? So I have questions about those groups.
Thank you for the question through the chair to Senator Don Loop, Assemblyman Torres for the record. So that's already existing in current statute. I think that Nevada Department of Education is available and they may be able to provide additional support for that question.
Please go ahead, Department of Ed.
This is Christy McGill from the Department of Education, Office of Safe and Respectful Learning.
Ms.
And yes,
McGill,
we
could
do
you move a
have-
little closer to your microphone? Thank you.
Is that better? Okay, this is Christy McGill from the Department of Education, the Office of Safe and Respectful Learning. And we do have those categories set up now for the demographics and also for ELL and with students for disabilities.
Thank you very much. I'm just aware of another bill that I sponsored that I was asked the same thing on, so I wanted to make sure that those were identified. And then the other thing that I would like to know about is when you, I'm aware of another bill, Assembly Bill 24, and I was wondering if this was a conflict or if that had been worked out, because that's also a bill about discipline.
Assemblyman Torres, for the record, to the vice chair, I guess. And can you please remind me of AB 24? I don't have my computer on me to be able to pull up the language.
So AB 24 was a bill responding to students, and just in a short, students who were being disciplined and being expelled permanently from a school.
Assemblyman Torres, to the chair and through the vice, through the vice chair and to the vice chair, for the record. And my understanding, I've worked with Nevada Department of Education diligently on this piece of legislation. I don't believe that there's any conflict. We had this conversation. I remember that there were two pieces of legislation that dealt with similar processes for restorative justice and school discipline and expulsion. So I believe that it would be applicable to one of those. And I don't remember that there was any conflicts. And I know obviously that the Nevada Department of Education is here and ready to answer those questions as well as that pertains to their office.
Okay, that would be great if the Department of Ed could answer that, because I know that that particular bill was a concern because students as young as 11 years old could be permanently expelled from the school district. So it may be the Department of Ed can jump in there and give us some background information on that.
Yeah.
Ms. McGill?
Yes, good afternoon. This is Christy McGill, Director of the Office of Safe and Respectful Learning. I think you're referring to AB 67, which is the department's bill to look at defining discipline. There is a definition in there for permanent expulsion. And again, that bill is to simply define the suspension, expulsion, and permanent expulsion. And we can work with Torres to make sure things align.
Thank you, and Assemblyman Torres for the record again. And yes, AB 67, I do remember. AB 24 wasn't quite crossing my mind, but yes. And we did check. We actually worked to make some of the similarities too in AB 194, so that it made sense with if AB 67 is to be voted out of this committee. So there were some amendments that were made in the first house to this piece of legislation to make it in line with AB 67.
Yes, apologies for the wrong number. Apologies. I've done like 67 bills today, I think, so. Thank you very much. Yeah, there was just a concern because I was worried that we're working on restorative justice, and yet we're saying that students as young as 11 years old could be permanently disciplined and removed from a school. And so where do those kids go, right? If they're permanently removed from a school, and I recognize the seriousness of the offenses, but what's going to happen to those kids?
Assemblywoman Torres, for the record, I completely agree that's an issue, but I think that this piece of legislation is trying to target another part of that issue, which is the lack of due process in several of our school districts for students that have been suspended or expelled. So in that instance, I truly believe, and I think that the supporters of this legislation would agree, that every student deserves access to due process. The unfortunate reality is in several school districts across Nevada, there is no access to due process. In that instance, the student and their family would have no method of an appeal for that suspension or expulsion. I believe that's exactly what this piece of legislation is aimed to fix. Additionally, this piece of legislation in section 1 of the bill is looking at requiring some type of plan for that training for restorative justice within our schools, which unfortunately I don't think has always been a priority. And so we need to ensure that school leaders and administrators are making those decisions to prioritize the training of their faculty and staff.
Thank you very much. Additional questions? Senator Donate, please.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman, for that presentation. Some of my questions are more towards the actual process of what occurs when a suspension or an expulsion determination has been made. Can you walk me through the process of, how the process is right now before this bill is implemented? So, for instance, student commits action. Action is determined to lead to either suspension or expulsion. And then what happens beyond that? Does the student is there a process where the student is caught up to the content that they missed out on? Is there any training beyond that? And then, how does that look like right now?
Thank you for the question, Senator, through the chair to the Senator. Assemblywoman Torres, for the record, I'm going to go ahead and defer the question to Mr. Jonathan Norman.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Senator, because what we have found, and I work specifically with primarily with kids in foster care in Clark County. And we would have kids sitting out of school for weeks at a time while the discipline process was playing out, and they were falling behind. And I think this bill, it makes it so that they have to be in that least restrictive environment while the process is sorting itself out so that they don't fall behind on education. And I think we see that happening a lot with kids that are especially vulnerable, like in foster care, falling behind. And it also impacts their ability to be placed in a foster home. Usually, if a child can't go to a campus, which this past year it's been a little different, it's difficult for the Department of Family Services to place that child because the caregiver may not be available to have the child in the home. So having behavior schools or some other avenue for that child to stay up on education is really important, and one of the things I think that's addressed here. Thank you.
Chair, if I may follow up.
Yes, go ahead.
And typically, what is the timeline or the average time that a student takes when they are suspended or expelled? Is that like a 3-day suspension, or what is the average that we usually see with these situations?
Bailey Bordelin, for the record. I'm going to jump in here. What we've found through our work assisting families through these appeals process is that it just varies greatly, not only by school district, but by school itself. And so different school districts have different processes, but then at the same time, because there's no clear timeline in statute, or some of the school districts don't have the policies explicitly laid out for the parents either, it really depends on the individual school to get that paperwork to the district and then to get that appeal moving. And so it's kind of a luck of the draw. I can't give you one answer that's a one-size-fits-all, because it really depends who the different adults are handling the documents, when they pass them off to the next person to continue the process. And so that's definitely part of the problem we're trying to solve, is that one kid shouldn't have their appeal take months where another one may be resolved quickly.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I mean, the only other thing that I just want to mention is that I really love Section 7, which deals with making sure that parents have the power to appeal, and that also means that language access is available for them for going through this process. So thank you for that. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Dennis. I was just wondering if you could remind me of what infractions would warrant an expulsion or suspension. So is it weapons, severe bullying?
Thank Thank you for the question, Senator. At this time, I think it would be appropriate to refer to the policy analyst or legal to jump in with what the current infractions are, or perhaps NDE.
Let's see, let me start with legal counsel, Mr. Killian. Is that something that you have knowledge of? What would require an expulsion? Right, is that the question? Senator Buck?
Thank you,
Is
Mr.
is the
Chair.
question what would yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm just wanting to know like specific infractions to warrant expulsion from a school.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. There are a very limited number of those actually specified in statute. I believe the question might be more appropriate to the department because I believe most of the disciplinary choices are made at the school district level, so it's not necessarily something set out in statute.
Thank you. So who do we have here from the department?
This is Christy McGill from the Department of Education, Office of Safe and Responsible Learning, along with Will Jensen. 168, there we go, 168 repealed that last session. There are no mandatory requirements that someone is expelled. Now they can be expelled, but it's not mandatory. Does that answer the question?
Senator Buck, does that answer the question? Okay. She's nodding her head yes. Okay, other questions? Yes, Senator Dontarolo.
Thank you for the second round. On page 4, once again, where we have each school district, including without limitation, the plan for restorative justice and the process for the progressive discipline, the manner in which school trains employees, how is that all going to be decided?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Torres. For the record, through the chair to the vice chair. And so that's part of the achievement plan that they're already required to do. So this is something that the accountability report is prepared by the individual schools. And then they prepare those reports. And so it's saying that a part of that would be a plan for how we're going to be dealing with restorative justice. And then a plan for progressive discipline so that it's clearly outlined. I believe that the accountability report is also published on their school's website. And then it would also deal with how they're going to be training it. So I think it's just adding another a checkbox, but also requiring them that administrators are planning for it. In education, we talk about that a lot. Like you have to plan for how you're going to provide students with these instructions. Administrators similarly need to plan for how they're going to be ensuring the training for their class or for their school sites. And so planning for that and making sure that it's a conversation at the front and not on the back end.
So I get that because I taught a whole truckload of years. But does that mean that every school can develop their own plan? There is not going to be consistency within that plan? Because it just says the plan, and verbatim from you said they will develop a plan. So does that mean each school can develop their plan? So my school could say, we're going to do this training and have this plan, and your school could do their training and their plan.
Assemblyman Torres, for the record, to the chair to the vice chair. My understanding is that Nevada Department of Education does release guidance on how to develop these plans, although I know that their president, Ms. McGill, wants to go ahead and step in. So it would be modeled off of the guidance from Nevada Department of Ed.
If we could have the department, go ahead. Ms. McGill.
Yes, Ms. McGill, Director of the Office of Safe and Respectful Learning, and that is correct. We last session we moved from progressive discipline plans to restorative discipline plans. The district submits those to us. They also then take that template and work down with each one of their schools. So it's first the district comes up with a restorative discipline template and plan, which we can support and assist with. And then each school meets that district's template and plan. And then, of course, there's also a student level, so there is the school, the district school, and then there's a student level of restorative practices.
So what happens if A, that plan's not submitted, or B, it's submitted and does somebody check that plan? In other words, like if I don't submit it, or I submit it and I've left some things out, or you think it needs to be a stronger plan, how does that process go?
Christy McGill for the record, Director of the Safe and Respectful Learning. It's really a team approach, because restorative practices is all about adult behavior change. And so to really look at, so if a plan is submitted or if a district is struggling with this, we really make sure that we try to connect them wherever they're at. So if they need specific training, let's say on student restorative practices, then we try to guide them to that student restorative practices. So again, when we first started this, we had a handful of districts turning in restorative plans. We're now well past 80% of districts moving from a progressive discipline plan to a restorative. And so it really is based upon the districts and where their strengths lies. We've also set up some mentoring between schools and districts as well. So they're kind of on all different spots, but we really are looking at each plan that the districts or charter submits to us, and then referring back and saying, hey, evidence-based says to use these specific strategies, you may want to consider that. So it's an ongoing conversation, and it will take several years to really start until you really see deep change.
Okay, I think we kind of heard you. Your volume went, when you first started, kind of went down, so I don't know if that was an issue on our end or on your end, but you were loud and then all of a sudden it dropped. So, but I think we got the gist of what you were saying. Other questions? I do have one. I thought I read through here, and it just got me, it reminded me of something from the past, and this may have been already addressed. If there is a discipline issue and the child is suspended or expelled, I thought I saw something in here that talks about continued education, so that they're able to continue to learn while this process is going on. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Thank you for the question, Chair Dennis. Assemblyman Torres for the record. And yes, the piece of legislation makes it very clear that the students have the right to be in the least restrictive environment possible, which means that they should be able to access education. As Mr. Norman referenced earlier, unfortunately, we have many students that when they are suspended or expelled, they're just out of the classroom and they're not receiving any education in that period of time. And so we want to just make sure that, Nevada statute aligns with what's actually required by federal law. Every student has the right to a quality education, regardless of maybe a discipline matter within the school. And so I think it's very important that we're ensuring that our school districts are providing that quality of education to our kiddos, and that they're not just held out of the classroom without access to that education for long periods of time.
Yeah, and that just that reminded me, because I remember when my kids were growing up, I think my son had been something for like 3 or 4 days. He had to come home until we could go in, and I always hated that the parent had to come in. But then you had a child that was just sitting there with no education going on for 3 or 4 days, and until you could get the matter resolved. And it was, I guess, an incentive to want to get kicked out so that you wouldn't have to go to school. And we want to incentivize them to want to continue to learn. And so anyway, so that I'm glad that you're addressing that. Okay, other questions? Okay, so let's go then to anyone. We'll switch to testimony. Anyone wishing to give testimony in support of AB 194, if you would here in the room, if you'd come forward. We do have 2 different seats here. So we do have folks here, so we'll start here and then we'll go online. Go ahead.
Hello, Committee Chair Dennis. My name is Hava Ahmed, Hawahahmad, and I'm here representing the Clark County Education Association. You'll hear our official testimony in a moment over the phone. However, I did want to take a moment and talk to everyone about restorative practices and the connection between the juvenile justice system. So as you all know, everyone has a past life. Mine was as a law clerk in a rural court and as a individual who ran a homeless and transient program. When it comes to AB 67 and AB 194, these types of practices and definitions are incredibly important to standardize practices and to collect data to ensure that we are able to address kind of the root stem of the issues. When it comes down to it, many children, especially during the suspension and expulsion process, turn off from school. So once they stop doing their homework, they don't start again. And that motivation to continue is lost. So these bills and this appeal process itself is going to help to provide families with like a very clear-cut idea of how to proceed to ensure that their students can participate and can grow and learn and not end up in the juvenile justice system and not end up in the adult justice system. We have a lot of work to go. Of course, this is also going to need a lot of robust resources for educators and wraparound services. But at the end of the day, we do just want to thank Assemblywoman Torres for bringing this legislation forward and for the department for bringing this legislation forward, because at the end of the day, to address the issues, we all have to work together to be able to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Lindsay Anderson, representing the Washoe County School District today. I just wanted to try to answer some of the questions that came up from the committee, but I do want to thank Assemblywoman Torres. She did reach out to us, I think before the session even started, to start floating this idea, and we did hear the stories that were being told about why this legislation was coming forward. And part of the reason I think that the amendment and the amended language that happened mostly on the Assembly side, but even some of the amendments that she mentioned today are so important. At least in the Washoe County School District, the vast majority, like in the 98% of our suspensions, are less than 3 days. And so when we talk about an appeals process, it's unlikely that appeals process will happen within that 2 or 3 day period that the student is suspended. Right now they get a form home to the parents. I think Senator Dunyate asked about what happens right now. They get a form home that they have to acknowledge and sign that says this is what happened, this is the process that we're going to go through for the discipline, and here's what you need to do if you're interested in an appeal. Certainly understand that that's not what happens everywhere, and that there's some need for standardization of that process. But we also want to acknowledge that in some cases these appeals may be like a record expungement kind of thing. We typically only suspend kids from the physical campus when there's a physical altercation, some kind of a safety concern for the student or for the staff. So we try to limit those suspensions out of school to the most serious cases. And so we're balancing our student and staff safety in these instances. In terms of what the plans are, we do have in the Washoe County School District basically a behavior matrix and a behavior manual that is kind of a template, I guess I would say, that is provided to each school that they can complete that makes sense for their school, but they're ultimately all rolled up into a district level plan. So each school does have a plan, but it is based on a district level parameter that's organized and then shared with the Department of Ed. I do think that the digital learning that we've now used in our schools in many cases will help in some of these cases. We don't want to necessarily be transferring students to a behavior school for a 2 or 3 day period of time. Moving schools can be a traumatic experience in its own right, and so we don't want kids bouncing back and forth from their traditional zone school to a behavior school, but we do have a small behavior school that we use in those most extreme instances. So again, I think this just sort of makes the case that every case is inherently different, and we want to standardize it, but we appreciate Assemblywoman Torres allowing us to work with the Department of Education to ensure that current processes that are working continue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to give public testimony in support of the bill here in the room? If not, let's go online. BPS, if you could queue up the first caller.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to testify in support on AB 194, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 023, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair Dennis and committee members. My name is Dr. Brenda Pearson, and I'm here representing the Clark County Education Association, BRENDAPEARSON. CCEA supports Assembly Bill 194. Overall, this bill provides a much-needed due process for student discipline in Nevada schools. The appeal process, through guidance by the Office of Safe and Respectful Learning Environment, establishes consistency and transparency. CCEA expressly supports the submission preparation of an annual report of accountability delineating the discipline of pupils, but we would be remiss if we did not stress the importance of utilizing this data to improve practices across our state. The collection of data must inform actions that will lead to the reduction of racial disparities. This data is a tool to inform our evolving practices and must be used as such. The successful implementation of AB 67, AB 194, and preceding student discipline bills must be built upon a strong foundation of restorative practices. Today, there is no such foundation in Clark County, so the movement from traditional behavior management to restorative practices must encompass robust supports, including ongoing training and coaching. In short, a move to restorative practices requires both a change in the behavior of the educator and the student. As such, we must continue to focus on building foundational knowledge and practices across our schools in Nevada. AB 194 pairs well with AB 67 and will help to standardize the approach to restorative justice across all 17 school districts. CCA appreciates the intent of this bill, but we caution the committee to look at the significant publication materials on juvenile justice to ensure that these changes are something that that will be standardized, unbiased, and easy for our educators to adopt and students to understand. CCA also asks that this committee look to increase funding in this area by optimally funding SB 543. Without funding, implementation of effective restorative practices will not happen. Funding SB 543 will ensure educators have the tools and training needed to reduce recidivism and address the school-to-prison pipeline. Though we will be able to utilize a percentage of our ESSER funds for implementation of this bill, one-time funds will not support a statewide transition to restorative practices. Fully funding SB 543 will impact the academic outcomes of our students as well as the behavioral outcomes. We do not have time to wait for another legislative session to find and pass new revenue to put the restorative practices and futures of our students first. Thank you again for the committee for hearing this bill. We look forward to continuing our work with Assemblywoman Torres on strengthening restorative practices within our schools.
Thank you. Let's go to the next caller.
Caller with the last three digits, 080, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Hi, Jim Hoffman, Hoffman, representing Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice. NACJ supports AB 194. Providing due process protections to students who are accused of wrongdoing serves two important functions. For students who did not do anything wrong, these protections will help them defend their innocence and avoid being wrongly punished. And for students who did do something wrong, more due process means more of an opportunity for educators and parents to figure out how to correct this behavior and keep kids from going down a bad path. This bill is a win-win, and so we support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to the next caller.
Caller with the last three digits, 149, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Dennis and committee. This is Annette Dawson Owens, Annette, Dawson, Dawson, Owens, Owens, School Readiness Policy Director at the Children's Advocacy Alliance. The Children's Advocacy Alliance supports AB 194 and the implementation of thoughtful, intentional, purposeful restorative justice processes and procedures, including mindful, well-researched, and thought-out suspension and expulsion practices. We aim to keep all students and their education fluid, continuously progressing forward. We know all students deserve and have the right to be educated and supported in their academic path and understand the difference a degree can make. We advocate for due process, clear timelines, as well as transparency regarding disaggregated data and reporting surrounding suspensions and expulsions. Thank you for all your efforts helping Nevada move forward with practices that lead to the best outcomes for every student, including an uninterrupted, high-quality education.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to the next caller.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. Let's go to those wishing to give testimony in opposition. Anyone here in the room? Okay, nobody's coming here, so let's go to the online.
Thank you, Chair. If you'd like to testify in opposition on AB 194, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers wishing to testify in opposition at this time.
Thank you. How about anyone wishing to give testimony in neutral here in the room? No one's coming forward. If we can go online.
If you would like to testify in neutral on AB 194, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers wishing to testify in neutral at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, we will we'll close the testimony portion. Any final comments?
Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee, for taking the time to hear AB 194 this afternoon. I just want to stress how important it is that every student has access to due process. And unfortunately, here in Nevada, that's not the educational environment that we have created. I think that this piece of legislation ensures that due process is guaranteed in statute and in regulations, and ensuring that our students have access to the least restrictive educational environment possible. I urge your support of AB 194. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, we'll go ahead and close the hearing on AB 194, and we will open the hearing on AB 367. And whenever you're ready, feel free to start.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair, and members of this studious committee. My name is Jill Tolles. I represent Assembly District 25. It is my pleasure to present Assembly Bill 367 on behalf of my constituent. You heard a good news minute last week about how we broke through to nationals. The Reno High School We the People team made third for the first time in Nevada history, and my constituent, Mr. Richard Clark, is here to help present this with me as well. So with your permission, Chair, I'd like to go ahead and begin the presentation on AB 367.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So part of the purpose of education is to prepare our students to enter the world as well-informed citizens and contributors to the community and economy. AB 367 seeks to accomplish two goals. First, it strengthens the commitment to teach critical disciplinary skills in social studies by enshrining them into Nevada revised statutes. Second, it provides flexibility for teachers and students to have the option to teach American government and economics as a combined course if the district approves in select cases. I had three guiding principles as I approached this legislation. Number one, no heavy lifts. Number two, no fiscal note. And number three, and this couldn't be emphasized as in a greater fashion than to say that I wanted to honor the work that was done before, particularly by all the supporters of teaching financial literacy through the addition of economics in social studies through SB 249 in the 2017 session, which I fully supported. As a daughter of two financial advisors, a mother of two teenagers making their way into college life and the adult life beyond, and as a teacher in higher ed who's seen firsthand how important financial literacy and economics is. So I'd like to walk through this bill, and I'd first want to start with talking about disciplinary skills in section 1.1E. I'd also like to draw your attention to the exhibit, and you'll see it, if you don't have it printed out, on Nellis with the Nevada Academic Content Standards for Social Studies. I did deliver a copy to each of your offices as well as a reference. So those disciplinary standards, disciplinary skills that we see here in the Nevada Ready Content Standards are in and of themselves valuable for training up a well-educated citizenry. If you'll notice on page 43, you'll see that the disciplinary standards include constructing compelling questions, creating supporting questions, gathering and evaluating sources, developing claims and using evidence, and communicating and critiquing conclusions, and finally, taking informed action. The College Career and Civic Life Framework for Social Studies State Standards states that now more than ever, students need the intellectual power to recognize societal problems, ask good questions, and develop robust investigations into them. Consider possible solutions and consequences, separate evidence-based claims from parochial opinions, and communicate and act upon what they learn. This simply codifies these critical thinking skills into statute. In short, these skills are critical in an age of rapidly disseminated information, misinformation, and disinformation, channeled through a variety of media and other informational sources for our students to be prepared to enter the world as critically thinking citizens and consumers. The second major part of this legislation is to offer a combined course in economics and American government. This section provides flexibility for teachers and students by removing the limitation that only an AP course can have the option to teach the 2 half units of American government and economics as a combined course if the district approves. I'd like to point your attention to Section 1 on page 2 of the bill. You will see here that already existing in statute in NRS 389.018, we are implementing 1 half unit credit of American government and 1 half unit credit of economics. You'll notice that is on lines 22 and 25. You'll note that down in existing law, starting on line 33, a school district may authorize 1 or more public high schools in the school district to offer a combined course in American government and economics for 1 unit of credit, which satisfies the requirements of subparagraphs 1 and 3. And you'll notice that this bill proposes to strike out the limitation that this would only be made available to if the curriculum of an advanced placement course is used for American government in the combined course. Now, there are several benefits to this proposed change. First, flexibility. As a teacher myself, I believe offering this flexibility where it is needed and desired is beneficial not only to teachers and the students who may learn better through that varied format, but also to the volunteers who we often depend on to help us teach the financial literacy portion, whether they're persons, businesses, or entities who are part of a program to help teach, particularly in this transition to economics. It also gives the flexibility to incorporate concepts throughout. So for example, for an American government teacher who wants to teach about the formation of the US Treasury, they might follow that up with 3 weeks talking about investment and interests and debt. And then later in the spring, as they're talking about state and local budgets, they might talk about personal budgeting practices, checking and savings accounts. There are 3 questions that typically come up when I talk about this proposal. 1, will this impact the financial literacy or economics requirements set to be implemented in July 1st of 2022? The answer is no. It is important to note that this would not reduce any of those requirements pertaining to teaching financial literacy or economics. All existing requirements remain in statute and are set for implementation by July 1st, 2022. Number 2, will this impact Infinite Campus or graduation requirements? No, the same method a district would use to apply the full credit of a combined course offered to an AP class for the purpose of graduation requirements would also work for non-AP courses who utilize this option, and students who would be graduating early would likely have completed this course their junior year. Number 3, will this mandate teachers move to a combined class? No. I anticipate with all the work over the past few years toward implementing the transition to 1 half unit of AG and 1 half unit of econ, starting in July of 2022, many, if not most teachers, will remain on that track. This merely allows school districts to provide this option if it is desired and appropriate in select circumstances. It may seem like a small change, but to the teachers and students who want the flexibility to weave American government and economics curriculum throughout the year, it makes a big difference. So with that, Chair, I'd like to pass it off to my constituent, Mr. Clark, with your permission.
Sure, welcome. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Education Committee. My name is Richard Clark. I'm a Social Studies Department Leader and We the People teacher at Reno High School. It is a great honor and pleasure to endorse Assembly Bill 367. I'd like to thank Assemblywoman Tolles for her guidance and help in this process. In Thomas Jefferson's 1818 report to the Virginia Legislature on reasons for the University of Virginia, he wrote, "The objects of this primary education would be to understand his duties to his neighbor and country, and to discharge with competence the principles and structures of government, the laws which regulate the intercourse of nations, and a spirit of sound legislation." And in no small part, AB 367 will continue Jefferson's philosophy on a well-rounded citizenry. This bill will allow teachers and school districts the ability to professionally determine how to best provide the 12th grade civics and economic standards. Over the last 50 years, we have boxed in curriculum. Students often ask, why do we do math in science class? Why are we working on writing in history? Why are we talking about public policy in environmental science? We are teaching a whole student to understand their duties to their neighbors and country, to discharge with competence the principles and structures of government. I'm a public radio enthusiast, to say the least, and there's nothing better than to hear the sweet sound of Kai Risdal's voice on APM's Marketplace. I listen to Marketplace to catch up on the day's market news. I listen to Marketplace to get caught up on policy and political news. What Marketplace does so well is what AB 367 would do, allow teachers the ability to wed our financial, economic standards with our civic standards seamlessly for our students to see and understand that these are not separate issues, but binary stars that orbit each other. I open each school year on a unit of what does it mean to be a citizen. By allowing me the ability to integrate these standards, I can now open this unit to financial impact of citizenship as well, and not have to do this similar assignment again in a separate semester. AB 367 will allow teachers to have the freedom to best implement the standards while allowing us flexibility to teach current events as they happen on their impact on both policy and the economy. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Is that your presentation? So we ready for questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I also wanted to note that we should have Dave Brainkamp from the Department of Education available to answer questions, as well as members from Washoe County School District, Clark County School District. And so with that, I'm ready to accept questions.
All right, thank you. Questions? Senator Dunn-Durham-Loop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Assemblywoman, I appreciate the work that you're doing, and thank you for teaching. I noticed that you complimented the work from 2017, but you failed to mention anything about the work that happened in 2019, which I believe Senate Bill 314, if I remember correctly. And I also think, and I don't have that bill with me, so I can't side by side, but I believe it undoes the work of the 2019 session. So I was wondering if you could address that for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, through you to Vice Chair Dunn-Durham-Loop. I want to make sure I understood your question correctly. You said you believe that SB 314 undoes the work of SB 249?
I believe your bill, Assembly Bill 367, undoes some of the work of Senate Bill 314 from last session. And because you didn't mention it, I thought maybe that was why you didn't mention it.
Thank you, through you, Chair, to Vice Chair Dunn-Durham-Loop. I'm afraid I don't have SB 314 in front of me. But I do know that the original language for putting the half unit and the half unit, I believe, was from SB 249, so that's why I referenced that. Happy to look at it, but again, as you can see here, the only changes that this is making is to make it an option for more than just an AP class, a non-AP class on a select basis for the school district to approve, to offer it as a combined course. So I couldn't emphasize enough that it is my intention not to undo the past work, of past legislation. I'm very appreciative of all the efforts of this body, and so I will certainly look at that side by side, but this specifically deals with what's in statute and set to be implemented in July of 2022.
Thank you very much, and I would appreciate that because I know there was a lot of work put into that bill last session, and when you didn't mention it, I thought maybe that was why. So if you could look at those side by side and make sure we're not undoing the Senate bill from last session, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. More than happy to.
Senator Doñate.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman and Chair Dennis. I apologize. I'm still trying to catch up to some of the terminology that we have in education, so you might have this question a little bit frazzled. But so I understand the reasoning of why we're trying to add this is to help students learn the necessary skills to combat the challenges of today, and that includes disciplinary skills. But correct me if I'm wrong, don't we already teach disciplinary skills as part of our curriculum? Is that something that's already embedded as we speak right now?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Senator Donate. Thank you for clarifying that. So yes, you're right. It's already currently in our curriculum standards. This just strengthens it by putting it at the statutory level.
Thank you so much. And Chair, if I may have a follow-up. Great. So I understand that the other section of this bill is to delete if the curriculum of an advanced placement course is used for American government in the combined course. Perhaps this is more of a question for any of the NDE representatives. What was the reasoning why we inclined that and restricted it only to the AP courses? Can I have some background as to why we made that decision? Because if we're planning to delete it, I think we should know why it was added in the first place.
So, yeah, this was the bill that came forth. I think this particular provision was there last session. Actually, let's start with our legal counsel, Mr. Killian. If you have any, because I think this kind of ties into the previous question too. How does this compare with what we did last session versus for 17 for that matter? Because I think we did it over two. It started in 17 and then we made some adjustments last time. If you could address that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Asher Killian, Committee Counsel, and pulling back to my memory from being Committee Counsel back in 2017, I believe the reason that this language relating to AP courses went into the bill back in 2017 was that the existing curricula for those AP courses included both of these components. And so the intent was to put in an exception to allow that to continue to be taught as one year-long course, rather than artificially breaking the AP curriculum up into two separate courses. But I'm sure Mr. Brankamp from the Department of Education might be able to provide more definitive clarity on that.
Yeah, and I was going to go to him next. Mr. Brankamp, can you do you have any additional comments on that topic?
Chair Dennis, Dave Brankamp for the record from the Nevada Department of Education. Asher Killian is correct in the sense that the original AP course was designed as both a government and economics course in one complete year. Those are set by the College Board. And with their requirements and so on for the tests. So, if we didn't allow that, that would be something that it would be pulling out of the entire College Board offering. So that's why it was put in, since it was already in play and students were utilizing that as an option.
So can you address the issue of how the changes that were made in 19, how this relates to that?
Again, Chair Dennis, Brankamp for the record from the Department of Education. The way this would set up now is, if I'm understanding it correctly from the something told description, is now it should still allow the AP course to be, it just allows the district now to create a one-year course of government and economics. That would still be the one unit. It wouldn't be restricted to just the AP offering that is out there currently.
So then I would address the Assemblywoman in that respect. If this were to go forth, what would guarantee, I mean, the current way that it's set up is you have to do one semester of the financial and one semester of the government. And if you were to mix them, the AP course, we know how that is because it's intertwined within it. But if it wasn't an AP course, it's just an honors government class, how would you ensure that, how does this bill ensure that as much time is placed on the financial as it is, so that it's an equal thing and not, 2 weeks of finance and then the rest of the time it's just all government?
Thank you, Chair, for that question. And once again, and it's certainly, I think, the concern that's raised. So the implementation team on the curriculum to put into econ and American government at each district level would be in charge of making sure that the same amount of time that's dedicated to teach econ would still be taught throughout that year. And I'd also like to revisit the question of Vice Chair Dondero Loop, since I had a chance to, thankfully I brought my laptop, I got a chance to bring up SB 314, and the statements that I made in my opening remarks still absolutely stand for SB 314 as well. So SB 314 added the financial literacy to Chapter 388 of NRS statute. There's absolutely zero in this bill that would change any of that. It also set up that committee that set up the implementation of the econ portion to be added to American government. So all that same work would translate over. And that is certainly 100% my intent.
Okay, other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any other additional questions from the committee at this time. So let's go to those that wish to give comment. Yeah, any that are here in the room, if they'll come forward. Okay, we've got. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Lindsay Anderson on behalf of the Washoe County School District. I'm here in support of this. As was mentioned, Assemblywoman Tolles worked with our social studies and financial literacy teams to ensure their support in the way the bill was drafted. And if there are educators like Mr. Clark that want to integrate these two subjects into one and still cover all the standards, which is what we expect of our educators, in terms of your question about how will we know, we expect our educators to cover the standards. And that is how we organize our time and curriculum. Then we would support that effort. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, and thank you, Committee Chair Dennis. My name is Hava Ahmed, H-A-W-A-H-A-H-M-A-D, and I'm here representing the Clark County Education Association. Our official support for this Assembly bill is on the record in an exhibit. However, we did just want to say that we are in full support of adding disciplinary studies in statute. Given the last year that we have had with misinformation, it's very important for students to be able to delineate between true and false information. Additionally, when it comes to economics and American government, it is in the best interest of our students to be able to integrate those two subjects together, to have them have a better understanding of how economics is applied within our government system. So for instance, in state government, if we talk about the budget process for our current state, that's going to be giving students a bigger picture of what is happening. We are in full support, and thank Assemblywoman Tolles for bringing this bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room wishing to give testimony in support? Okay, not seeing anybody coming. So let's go to those online. If BPS could queue up the first caller.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to testify in support on AB 367, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 742, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Dennis and members of the committee. My name is Jimmy Lau, first name J-I-M-M-Y, last name L-A-U. with Ferrari Public Affairs representing the Nevada Credit Union League. Credit unions pride themselves on being partners with the communities they serve, and part of that partnership is advocating for enhanced financial literacy for their members and for the public. NCUL members regularly engage in programs to enhance financial literacy in schools, and would like to thank Assemblywoman Tolles for championing this legislation to ensure crucial instruction in economics can be well adapted into overall education and financial literacy. Again, NCUL would like to thank the Assemblywoman for bringing forward this important legislation, and would like to thank the committee for hearing this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Let's go to the next caller.
Caller with the last three digits, 692. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mary Przinski, MaryPierczynski, and we're representing the Nevada Association of School Superintendents, and we're in support of AB 367. We appreciate the fact that Assemblywoman Tolles reached out to us prior to the session when she was working on the bill, and we had an opportunity to give input. We also appreciate the flexibility that this piece of legislation gives to our social studies teachers. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to the next caller.
Once again, if you'd like to testify in support on AB 367, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Thank you very much. So let's go then to testimony in opposition. Anybody here in the room? Nobody's coming forward here, so anybody online?
If you would like to testify in opposition on AB 367, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers wishing to testify in opposition at this time.
Thank you. Let's go to those in neutral. Anyone here in the room in neutral? No one coming forward. Let's see if there's anybody online.
If you would like to testify in neutral on AB 367, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers wishing to testify in neutral at this time.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and close the testimony in this bill. Assemblywoman, any final comments?
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, members of this committee. I do understand that there were some concerns, particularly in regards to anything undoing the work of the past. I do hope that you feel satisfied with the questions on the record and the content of the bill, that you can see that it's very small, very straightforward, and would only be used in very select circumstances, but could provide very much needed flexibility that would help both teachers and students and the volunteers that we don't want to see bottlenecked into just one semester. If we were able to spread them out, I think that it will make an even better impact in terms of teaching those financial literacy skills. And I would sincerely ask for your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being with us. With that, we will go ahead and close the hearing on AB 367. Thank you for coming today. Let's go now to our next item on the agenda. Let's see, we've done all our work sessions. Public comment would be our next. So let's open the public comment. Anyone wishing to give public comment, come forward here in the room. We'll start here. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lindsay Anderson on behalf of the Washoe County School District. I can't be here in person and not provide you a good news minute at the end of your hearing today. And it was just announced today that one of our Roygam Elementary School Gophers artwork made it as a finalist for the Doodle for Google National Contest. We'd ask that you please spread the word to your community to vote for Erica Kundu's drawing. She would receive a college scholarship and a potential $50,000 award to her elementary school in technology. So congratulations to her and Roygam Elementary School, and hopefully she wins that national contest. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. How do you spell her last name?
Her name is Erica, Arika, last name Kundu, Kundu. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. 2 years ago, SB 543 was developed behind closed doors, wasn't introduced until the 99th day of the session, had but a single public hearing with the bill passing minutes before sine die. Today, on the 99th day of this session, SB 439 was introduced with less fanfare, but it was also developed behind closed doors without even a preview of its content. The new funding plan will fail because it was never built to succeed. Ever since the introduction of SB 543 2 years ago, NSC has expressed policy concerns at every opportunity: the lack of educator voice, no new revenue, watering down Zoom and Victory schools, freezing and squeezing school district budgets, a giveaway to charter schools, and undoing the rules of collective bargaining. SB 439 fails to address a single issue raised by educators, showing its backers to be unserious about delivering a funding plan to benefit all Nevada students. Nevada ranks 48th among states in education funding, yet the new funding plan includes no new funding. While the Funding Commission has recommended a 10-year plan for Nevada to increase education funding by $2 billion per year, SB 439 completely ignores these recommendations. Meanwhile, SB 439 further moves Nevada backward by proposing to strike language in the NRS that references merit salary increases and cost of living adjustments. If the legislature is intent on moving forward with the implementation of the new funding formula, NSCA recommends making 3 changes to ensure the new plan does significantly less harm to Nevada's students and educators. First, grandfather existing Zoom and Victory schools located in Nevada's poorest communities, serving the highest percentage of at-risk students and proven model of education equity. Second, hold districts truly harmless by using the greater of 2020 total budget or per pupil amount by district, adjusted by the inflationary cost of doing business. Finally, remove anti-union language that increases the district ending fund balance walled off from collective bargaining up to 16.6% of annual operating costs to preserve the collective bargaining process. Please listen to educators. Any trailing legislation that does not bring new revenue or address these serious policy concerns is doomed to fail Nevada educators and students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to give public comment in the room? Okay, let's go to those on online. If you could queue up the first caller.
Thank you, Chair. If you'd like to participate in public comment, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 157, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
My name is Susan Kaiser, Kaiser. I am asking you to support fixing SB 543. Recently, while helping a family member pack up a house to move, we wanted to make coffee but had already packed the right filter for the pot. So first I tried to alter a drip coffee filter to fit the cone. Then I tried folding a paper towel to approximate the needed filter. In the first attempt, the coffee looked like tea. In the second attempt, it produced coffee of a better quality, but the grounds had escaped into the carafe, making it undrinkable. The end result was that the coffee produced was substandard, not because of the lack of effort on my part or my motivation, but because I lacked the tools to accomplish this task. This situation is not unlike the one educators find themselves in every day as they try to provide meaningful learning experiences for their students. They lack the tools to do their best work, and sometimes the end results of the effort comes up short. When teachers are provided the resources they need, their students' performance improves, reflecting that investment.
Zoom and Victory Schools are an example of what can be achieved with a major infusion of funding for our kids. Zoom and Victory Schools should continue into the future while additional funding is generated to bring other schools up to their funding levels. One lesson learned during the pandemic is the critical value of our public schools to our state economy. They educate the next generation, but they also literally provide an enriching, safe environment for children of all ages to grow and learn while their parents are at work. Companies are enticed to relocate to Nevada with a variety of tax incentives and abatements, yet upon closer examination, they may reconsider when they learn that not all that glitters in Nevada is made of gold. In fact, Nevada is near the bottom of per pupil funding, ranking at 48th, and we have the additional distinction of the highest class sizes in the nation. But you don't have to take my word for it. I'm quoting Mike Tesmersky, CEO of EDON, who said, quote, Nevada's funding for education and our public education rankings have already discouraged new companies from investing in our state and are putting our kids at a distinct advantage in our new economy, end quote. Now more than ever, in the waning shadow of the coronavirus pandemic, every Nevadan needs to receive a funding education that is fully funded. I urge you to start now and fix SB 543. Thank you.
Let's go to the next caller.
Once again, if you'd like to participate in public comment, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and close public comment. That is our last item on the agenda. We will meet again next on Wednesday in our regular scheduled hearing or meeting. So with that, we have no further items to come before us at this time. We are adjourned.